All right. So we are waiting. Let's get that screen clean here. Alrighty. So hello, welcome to a live Q&A discussion. We're on Instagram. We are on YouTube. So for people who are interested in choro music in general, I wanted to go over a couple things just as a process of getting the thing going, exploring the music. And if you already know some things, I would say that I'm hoping you're going to listen to my ramble and check boxes like, yep, I know that. Yep, I know that. Yep, I know that. And something if you don't know, then great. So the first thing, if you are new to the music, it's a bit of a chicken and the egg, but listening to the music and dealing with the sheet music are the two biggest things that you need to start with. There's no progressing in this music if you're not listening to it. And the overwhelming majority of people who come to this music and play the music deal with sheet music. In the beginning, that was not the case back, 100 years ago. And it's really only recently that Brazilian musicians might commonly read music. Not everyone read music. I don't have any data or ethnomusicological specifics on that, but that is what I've been told many times over. So, reading the music and what that means for your instrument, your role means different things. If you're a melody player, obviously reading the melodies. If you're a chord player, reading the chords. But the form, that is the first box to check. Making sure that if you're coming to this music from jazz, from a number of places, that you are comfortably managing the 2-part or 3-part or sometimes 4-part choro forms. And for many people not accustomed to the music, that's the first obstacle. They get thrown by where the eye has to jump from, right? And you want to look at a choro, and first thing first, you're asking how many sections does it have? Uh, while we talk about A's and B's in performance of the material, people often in the real time might put up a finger, section 1, section 2, section 3, because it's clearer. And sometimes letters get kind of lost in the chaos when everyone's playing together. Um, Listening to the music is kind of this key other thing. And in listening to the music, just as a base level, when you deal with the form and the sheet music, you're going to see that in performance, not everyone repeats the sections that they are written in the sheet music. This is the biggest thing that people get thrown by. It's more common that people repeat a section that is not repeated than they omit a repetition. And the reason is that in many of the recordings, they were limited to, for example, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever it might have been. So there wasn't time to repeat an A section. Mumurando is a composition that Jacob de Bandolim made famous, and this is a great example. He does not repeat the A section, but when many people play this in a jam, they do. So being able to not get thrown when that happens and to use your ears, that is the biggest thing that starts to kind of differentiate beginning players from more advanced players, is that they understand sometimes something happens and you've got your ears to tell you what it is. And if you're not listening and you're looking at one thing and everyone else is on a different piece of the sheet music, you weren't listening. So the more you listen to the music, the more you might get some clues. Sometimes songs have typical and known issues around this, Mumurando being one. And sorry, I'm getting distracted by some people who are joining. Hello, hello. Hey, Amy. Hell, hey. That's funny. A mosca. Okay. So getting used to managing these differentiations is a big one. And I can say that, like, for me, I listened to the music when I was falling in love with it and coming to it, partly because I had a teaching job that was an hour and 20 minutes away, hour and 20-minute drive there, hour 20 back. So I listened to at least 2.5 hours of choro music all the time. And I just listened to it in my life. I loved it. It was really an obsession. And it reminds me of something that I heard in a podcast A jazz guitar teacher was saying, I get a lot of students who come to me because they are taking jazz lessons thinking it will make them flexible and a better musician in other areas of their playing. And he's like, you're never going to become a proficient jazz musician because you don't have the passion for it. And you really need the passion to get over various humps and obstacles to kind of press through with some of the things that are typical. For example, transcribing. In other words, using your ear to figure out what is being played on a recording, having nothing to do with sheet music, not resorting to YouTube tutorials, not resorting to the written, but purely using your ears. That takes a lot of work. It's really difficult. So, having the passion for the music translates to listening to the music all the time. And that's really a key thing. And obviously, when those of us here in the US have the experience of playing with choro musicians who come from Brazil, perhaps they're coming to New England choro camp or Brazil camp, or however the situation might occur, you realize that many of them are just like expressing something that they have heard perhaps their whole life. And so for those of us who are trying to make a connection and we're listening to it casually here and there in a mix of some other stuff, I mean, you really got to dedicate a lot of time to the listening. So you're at a point, you can manage the forms on the sheet music. Uh, you're listening to the music, you're connecting dots. And now we got to kind of go through what I would say is a process, a hierarchy. The first thing is for the melody players, understanding how to bring the melodies to life. And the number one thing is that melodies that are written 16th, 8th, 16th are generally played short, short with a little bit of a rest and another short. So not, but instead, right? Um, this is sort of an area that you can have a lot of creativity in. The fact of the matter is, um, you might not do that religiously. You might make exceptions to that in the name of playing more express with more expressiveness. And there's a million other things in terms of the expression, and that's really what the purpose of listening is, because it's too much to notate sheet music with all the articulations. Usually some people do it, but most of the time no. It would be too much to put this is short, this is stressed, this is an accent, this is a sforzando, whatever it would be. The notes are written, and it's up to us to listen to the recordings, to study, to bring those bring those songs to life. All right. So um, let's talk about a couple different tunes. And this is really starting to get into what I wanted to talk about today, which is that the way that I was taught and the things that were emphasized were from a rhythm section and rhythmic standpoint. Number one, understanding the different rhythms and the grooves that go with them, right? So if you're playing a choro rhythm, you might have this like one yen, two yen, one. And sometimes you have to play, you can play all four of these. As you heard, I kind of muted the first one, but you could play one. So we've got shorter rhythms. There's many other rhythms. Studying those, getting into what those are. There's many resources out there. That's not what I wanted to spend my time on. But the grooves would include tangos, polkas, mashishis, valsas, which is waltz, this shorter rhythm, the different types of samba. So getting into that as a rhythm section player is an important part of the process, right? Not always are the songs written with that style. Again, listening, doing the homework, communicating with other teachers and players in your community. So that is for the rhythm section. Melody wise, finding ways to become more expressive is the name of the game. And this is the number one reason why, when you play with your friends, the practice of everybody playing the melody together is not generally how the genre is played, because an experienced player won't play the melody necessarily the way it's written. And in many cases, they're looking for opportunities to put their own personal stamp on it. So when everybody plays together, you either have to predetermine we're all gonna what? Read it, if we're all reading exactly as it's written. We're going to all play the articulation that Jacob de Bandoline played when he recorded Lamentos or whatever. It gets difficult to all play together. And even if you do, you run into things where different players may have different experience levels, and this thing about using short notes and long notes is not dealt with the same, and so it's kind of lost. So whenever possible, you want to create an opportunity where the melody player is playing by him or her or they themselves, right? And so sometimes you have to find, if you have a lot of melody players, ways to switch from one person to the next, sometimes in the middle of a section, right? So you might have to take an A section and split it in half. A song like Benzinho has a convenient middle part. So any song like that, you can take advantage of that. Sometimes you just kind of have to give somebody the nod. And generally, since this practice of switching the melody in the middle of a section is not normal, you have to kind of really use eyes, or sometimes like, hey, take it, or some kind of way to communicate that you're doing that split. But the normal practice would be a given melody player plays an entire section themselves. And then you would either eyeball the other person next to you or a person across from the circle. This is one of the reasons that we traditionally sit in a circle when you play choro, is so that you can communicate with each other. And another reason why reading music is problematic, because your eyes are on the paper and not able to communicate with each other, right? Um, Traditionally in Brazil, when people get together, melody players will call songs that they have memorized. And if somebody else calls a song and you don't know it, sometimes you just hang out, drink a beer or a cup of tea, whatever your thing is. Um, so the general advice I would give anyone is you're better off memorizing fewer tunes than reading anything and everything, because the process of memorizing is going to inherently have you going deeper with the song so that you can get further with that melody, rather than being at a surface level of just reading the notes on the page. Um, I once heard that it was advisable to memorize 60 choros before you create any variations or improvisations. That's a high bar. I would say it depends on your musicianship, because some people are advanced musicians when they come to choro, and they have an ability to sort of tease out good melodic variation ideas before they do anything, um, before they have to go too far with it. Let's talk now about getting sort of, this is now we're into the more intermediate and advanced level. So I wrote a document, and this is where I was hoping that people might actually, if you want to email me, I'll put my email in these chats here. If you want to email me, I'm Brian at brianmoranmusic.com. That's my email address. And the purpose of emailing me would be for the document I'm going to start talking about here. Let's see. So that's Brian at brianmusic.com. And I can send you a copy of the document that I'm going to work off of, that I prepared. So, in no particular order, a list of songs and things that you want to ask yourself if you know. Doce de Coco. Doce de Coco, for better and worse, I learned early on as some example of a ballad. If you listen to the recording, there's not really anything about the tempo that suggests that this song is a ballad. So being mindful of that, and if you are in the rhythm section and somebody calls it, you kind of have to communicate with them or suss out what they are thinking. Because if the clarinet player says, I want to play dosu jikoku, and you start, that's going to have them, and they may have been thinking, totally different vibe. So the tempo on that song, I would say it's sad when that song lives as a ballad only. Bring that song to life, play it at the tempo, closer to the tempo at least that it was originally recorded at. There's another aspect to that song that reminds me of a podcast I recently watched in which the comparison was being made between choro and ragtime, and the Brazilian pianist, ethnomusicologist, Enrique, I forget his last name, but he was positing that Italian and European arias from classical music and opera music was one of the biggest influences on the development of the melodic style. And uh, I had not heard that specifically. For what it's worth, I just asked ChatGPT about that, and the response was that the melodic, or excuse me, the craze, the aria craze, really peaked in the 1700s. So whether or not that is accurate about arias at that time, I'm not sure, but for certain, the melodic style of choro and the expressiveness is huge, and it makes a lot of sense that it came from that language and possibly others as well. And for example, in Dozu Jikoku, we hear Jacob. He uses these slides, these glissandos. He plays with the rhythm of the song in a way that is something that's very personal and something that you can learn a lot from in studying the recording. And one of the many reasons why everyone playing the melody together, that would be nearly impossible and kind of defeat the purpose of everyone playing together if we're all going to try to glisten the same way, play with the rhythm in the same way, those types of things. So moving on, Dosu Jikoku, not too slow. Bola Preta, do the guitar players know where the break is? There's a break, and it's almost the same break as Benzinho. These are two Jacob do Bandolim songs. It's in the middle of the A section. And if you learn one break on, for example, Benzinho, you could apply it to Bola Preta. But knowing that break, and when you kick that song off, really kind of being dialed in, guitar players, like there's a break in the middle, knowing what it is. It's basically the simplest way to play it is to think about an A concert A7 chord and understanding that arpeggio, root, major third, fifth of the chord, root of the chord, chromatic descent to the flat 7, and then you basically come down the scale. And that, just as a piece of language in baixaria, which are the counter melodies in choro, is a crucial thing here. So going back, or moving on rather. So that break. Umazeru. Umazeru is the piece. Actually the part that follows. That's one way it's played, and then that's another variation. I'm sure other people have created other variations. Being careful not to all rely on playing together and getting to that part and doing different things. Noites Cariocas. So Noites has so many different things. Jacob himself recorded in studio versions, 2 different versions. They've got all sorts of subtle differences. Again, this one is just basically the type of song that is problematic to all play together. All the little details that you can start listening for example, in the B section, this like that little hammer pull, mordant, whatever you want to call it, appoggiatura, blah blah blah, all the different things that we can do. So Jacob routinely does this kind of a thing. Whatever your instrument might be, it's a great idea to start exploring how to put those in there. And most of them are not written in the chart. Again, it would just be too clunky, too much information. All right. One of the big things I often talk about in workshops is how to communicate with musicians in the Hoda about the intention of a section change. Are we repeating a given section that you're on, or are you moving on to the next? Unless you're improvising and sort of opening up the section for repeated passes of that section for the purpose of improvisation, which is kind of an application of a jazz approach. It's more common here in the US, I'd say, than it is in Brazil. But in big jam sessions where everyone's eager to play, sometimes that's the way people do it. If you have that, you might repeat a given section 3, 4, 5 times, whatever. But other than that, for the most part, a section is either played once or twice. That's it. So the question is, are you playing it once or twice? And control over the melody, the exploration of these things I'm talking about in general gives you tools for how to perhaps communicate where you want to go. And the biggest way, the most common way is to dial in the dominant seventh chord that and its function. So if I'm in the key of F, F is 1, C7 is 5. And if the second section of the song goes to D minor, the D minor has its own 5 chord. You have to think of D as 1, and if you use your hand and the alphabet, you could count up D, E, F, G, A, because musical alphabet, right? G to A. But A is the 5 chord, the dominant chord of the D minor. So if I'm on a melody in F major and the section resolves, there's some kind of phrase that maybe has a G minor, C7, and resolves to an F. If I want the section to go onward into the B section, sometimes I need to play some bit of a A7 harmony. It could be an arpeggio. It could be sort of repetitively playing the A. And my favorite thing is to take an excerpt or find some creative way to reference the melody of the section that is coming up, right? So, for example, Gostosinho, another Jacob de Bandolim song. I believe in the studio in the original Jacob. Actually, there's so many versions in my head. I can't remember if he plays the A section once or twice. But when, let's say we want to play it once and move on into the B section, right? So the part of the end of the A melody, uh, um, so I prematurely played an A7 to say, I want to go on to the A section, right? So practicing things like that puts you in a position where you have to ask yourself, can I read the melody, create like a blank spot in my mind where now I'm not reading, I'm injecting my own thing, and then pick back up the reading? For me, that's difficult. I'd rather just not read. But I don't know. It's something you can develop. Everyone kind of needs that ability to articulate the harmony. So, whoops. Moving onward, Receita de Samba. Do the guitar players know the counter lines in the B section? That's a big one. Do they know the harmonization of the lines? The 7-string guitar plays one line, and the harmony guitar plays harmonization to that. So kind of put that on your list of things to explore. Another question, Receita de Samba. Do you play the Jacob original introduction, or do you create usually a 2-chord groove? G major to C minor is the typical one. So what's the strategy there? Those are kind of the typical things for that. Aguenta Seu Fulgência, made famous by Jacob, has all sorts of variations. there is a variation on the A section, right? This is the song that goes, etc. The instead of Jacob has a variation playing around with a different kind of a melodic idea. Those are all good things to research. And again, many of them are not written into any chart. Benzino has a common harmonization. So if the melody, there is a harmonization. And the two things create thirds. I don't know if I can. And nobody tries to, that I've seen, it's possible, nobody tries to play the harmony part on the same instrument they're playing the melody. It's generally like a part left for a second person. So it's a great opportunity for melody players who are kind of sitting around waiting their turn to have something to do and let a different person play the actual melody. All right. Again, Benzino has got the break in the middle of the form. There is a counter line in the B section that is not super well known, but that is played on one of the two different versions that Jacob recorded for this song. He recorded two studio versions, and one of them has a little guitar counter line. So researching that. There's an ending that some people play, some people ignore, some people don't know. So there's an ending where we have a little like a D minor 6, D minor major 7 phrase. Let's see here. Bali Bali. I once heard Bali Bali as like the groove graveyard because the speed that people play it at make sustaining the melody with upbeats difficult in the beginning part of many musicians' choro journey, right? We're often kind of relying on downbeats in order to stabilize that song. It can be difficult to maintain upbeats. Of course, for something like that, you could just grab here. You could grab a metronome and I would say an exercise you could do is if you take the fork, which is da 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 da. Let's slow it down a little bit. Da 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 da. I'm for purposes of illustrating, I'm overemphasizing the downbeat. Da 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 da, and then you would omit the downbeat. Instead of da 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 because the melody is essentially all upbeats. And when the tempo starts cooking along and we're it can be challenging to maintain the feeling of the song. So doing some research on that, checking out how to practice with that kind of a sound. Let's see. Murmurando. And for that matter, Lamentos and Vibrações. Those three songs all have something in common to my ear. And when I thought of just what I really wanted to talk about, kind of at the highest level that I could think of, those three songs have something in common, which is that of the many pieces of advice, let me actually sort of put a pin in that and just say, of the many pieces of advice that I've had, uh, learning, the importance of the groove, respecting, is it a machixe? Is it a choro? Is it a choro sambado? Is it a samba? Blah, blah, blah. Respecting the rhythmic integrity of that is something I've heard a million times. But I've never heard somebody say that there is a melodic way to play some of these styles, and I'm not necessarily saying there is. Um, but when you make your improvisations or variations to the melody, I think this is especially relevant. And what I've noticed, for example, is if Jacob, I was listening to Jacob's performance of Proezas do Salon, and he plays in a very kind of controlled rhythmic way. And the tempo of that song is kind of similar to some of other pieces that he played, where you could say Proezas is like a choro and something else. I don't know, maybe it's like a samba. But sometimes a player is playing very liquidy, very slidey. They're using chromaticism in a very intentional, interesting way um, that suggests that they have sort of assigned a particular approach to a song that they want to play. And to be honest, I've never really heard of anyone saying that you could think of a song as having a particular melodic stamp that the song comes with, that when you create your improvisations, you're trying to honor that thing, right? And when I look at vibrações, for example, there are so many moments that kind of break rules, um, and the piece is so beautiful. A good example is in the key of D minor, A7 is the 5 chord, and the secondary dominant that sets up an A7 is an E7. And generally speaking, when you create extension notes and melody notes on top of any given chord, if the chord is a diatonic chord, it makes sense that the extended notes that are outside of the chord kind of reflect the overall scale tonality, the scale, the key signature, really. And when you do this to non diatonic chords, for example, the E7, it's a chord that comes from a different scale. You generally color that chord with notes that are closer to the home key. And in D minor, all of the F notes are F natural. And that has to be that way because if they were F sharp, you wouldn't be able to create a D minor chord and you're in the key of D minor, right? The F sharp note belongs to the key of D major. So there's this thing that we learned in jazz, at least I learned it, is in the minor key, you can play with all sorts of chromatic notes, but you have to be really cautious about including the F sharp note because it's associated with the major. And the major key uh, takes all the sadness and the melancholy quality out of like that F sharp note would kind of ruin what you're trying to do in D minor, in the overall key of D minor. So when the E7 chord occurs, you should typically use an F natural note to color that chord. And very often the chord is written as E7 flat 9, E7 flat 9. And the flat 9 note is F natural, right? That would be like taking an E7 chord and putting this F natural on it. But there's a moment in the A section of Vibrações that Jacob plays. He plays down on the E7 this sequence of notes that have an F natural right there and an F sharp right there, moving on to the G sharp. And there's all sorts of ways to analyze moments like this that happen. Is it the use of the switch from the harmonic minor to the melodic minor? Is it this? Is it that? Is it just chromaticism? That's my bit of a pet peeve is people often will be like, oh, it's just chromatic. No, I think Jacob's genius is his ability to essentially play whatever he want and make it work, right? Sometimes he uses the blue note. For example, in Mumorando, one of his variations, um, he goes right to this A flat note. So, sometimes he's just playing aggressively kind of outside sounding sounds. Sometimes in the case of this thing from Vibrações, oh, sorry. One of the greatest examples of the use of the major note in the minor key is in the same song in Vibrações. In the B section, on the repetition of the B section, the guitars play this melodic thing. And on the fourth figure, I mean, just by itself, it's an E flat, a D, and an E natural. The harmony is C minor. The rule in harmony says C minor needs an E flat note to be a minor chord. There's E flat, there's the chord. You can't have an E natural, that would make it a C major. And in this example, it's both the E flat and the E natural. So Jacob is a master at finding ways to do that type of thing. And when it comes time to create improvisations, this is sort of where the transcribing, the practice of listening and trying to figure out with your ears as much as possible is going to do wonders for your musicianship. What I want to work on in an upcoming workshop, if you're interested in this workshop, on May 17 at the Jazz School in Berkeley from 2 to 4 p.m., is to look at murmurando, vibrações, and lamentos in the style of Jacob, and talking about communicating some of these ideas. So communicating, the idea of which section you may want to repeat, using some of these ideas, these expressive ideas of improvisation within sort of the style, and getting off the page as much as possible. The hardest aspect of that would be perhaps the melody, memorizing these melodies. Murmurando and Vibrações are both in D minor. They have some overlap there. Lamentos starts out in D major. The Lamentos arrangement by Jacob is like an absolute masterpiece. Paying special attention to those recordings and trying to glean as much as possible from how he phrased the melody is something I'd like to go over. There is a wonderful transcription done by a friend of mine, Almir Korches. Almir's transcription is included in the version of the song that I believe is published by Mike Marshall in the second edition of the choro book. I could be wrong about that. I have to see where the source is. But Almir's transcription includes Jacob's famous variations. But it's better to pick these things up by ear, partly to really study it deeply and partly to develop a little bit of a flexibility on it. Those are kind of contradictory ideas, but that's kind of the special nature of choro, is to say we have to do that work to try to learn and play as close we can to the masters, and then we have to find our own way of doing it, right? So the variation I'm talking about is this. Things like this. Understanding some of the choices that Jacob made. In that little segment, the original melody, there's a C sharp note right there. On the repetition of the passage, when he plays that same kind of moment, he swaps out that C sharp for an A sharp. The harmony in that moment is basically a F sharp 7 chord, and he knows that C sharp and A sharp are both chord tones on that melody. Excuse me, on that harmony. So the ear, I mean, I didn't listening as I did back when I was 20 years ago. I didn't really notice that he did that because he didn't go like excuse me uh he could have gone like just a kind of really taking the melody to a different place, but the principle was the same there. I played an A sharp, one octave up. I would say if you were trying to find your own way of doing it, you could explore that. Um, but what he did was kind of a little bit more subtle. So, and he does a similar thing in ensuing phrase. So, understanding some of those variations and doing whatever work you need to do to kind of wrap your head around his process. Uh, Sometimes, yes, he's smartly choosing chord tones. Sometimes he's using this kind of liquidy thing that he does with the melody. Um, and some of these recordings are so iconic that they really like become the standard of how the song is played. And when you listen to the older recordings by Pichinguinha and others, you'll see that very often um, that level of expressiveness, the playfulness, speeding up and slowing down the time, things like that. Rushing into a phrase and then slowing it down. Those are not so much a part of the previous generation. That's really, I would say, something that Jacob really began to put into the music. So moving along and starting to get toward the end of this discussion here, and I'm just kind of looking at if there's any housekeeping or whatever I need to attend to. Looks like not so much. Odeon. Knowing that Odeon by Ernesto Nazareth was composed in C sharp minor, recorded by Jacob in D minor, and guitar players who play the melody love to play it in E minor. So dealing with that. Brejeiro, another Nazareth composition. I like to think of the A section. Well, actually, understanding first and foremost that Nazareth composed two sections, and so many of us play the Jacob version of that, which is four sections. So Jacob composed in the style of the first two, an additional two parts. So it kind of conforms more to some of the modulations that traditional choros with three and sometimes four sections would do. So if you are dealing with four sections, I personally like to make the first section, think of it more as a tango, and the second section a mashishi. Third section tango, fourth section mashishi. It's really rare that people perform the two-section version as in the original. Jacob also, I believe, changed the key. I believe the original, or at least the sheet music that's widely out there for the Nazareth version, may be in A major. That's certainly common for guitar players, like Yamandu kind of popularized the solo guitar version in A. I'd actually have to research the original key that Nazareth composed it in, but Jacob put it in G major to start with. And so knowing how to articulate those different styles, tango versus mashishi, is a thing. The mashishi is a little bit more of a rhythmic, it's considered a dance form. So it makes a lot of sense that in the melody, it's given a really kind of strident, this type of a feel, where, well, um, and then think like there's ways to play the A section and the C section that are a little bit more liquidy, and maybe that's a better fit for a tango, a Brazilian tango. And I have this long list that includes like questions and considerations for Ginga do Mané, Segura Ele, Vou Vivendo, Naquele Tempo, Sonoroso, Assanhado, Chorinho Pra Você, Apanete Cavaquinho, Cheguei, André de Sapatos Novos, Santa Morena. All of these songs have little things about them. For example, Segura Ele, it's common people play the C section as a polka because Paulo Moura did that on a famous live recording. So a lot of these considerations, if you want to send me your email, I will email you this document. And hopefully I'll see you on, if you're in the area, on Sunday, May 17 for the workshop. I'm gonna email these charts for these 3 songs that we'd work on: Vibrações, Murmurando, Lamentos, all in the style of Jacob. And we'll go over things, largely with sort of, I want to say top level, meaning getting the melody down, being able to play the melody one at a time, passing the melody around. I don't want to worry too much about all the different variations and improvisations. I'll certainly address any questions or go there as much as we can. People often talk about or ask me about baixaria. Baixaria is just such a huge subject, but I thought I would just take a quick second to talk about some guitars here. Oh, let me see here. Okay, so this is a traditional guitar, and I really sort of doubled down on the sound here. I took a lesson with Patrick Angelo, who said that he noticed that a lot of players are using D'Addario chromes strings on their traditional setup. Let me actually back up a second, because if you don't know that, you could mess up your guitar, and we don't want that. So a traditional 7-string guitar has 2 nylon strings, because right, it looks like a classical guitar, and then steel electric flat wound guitar strings from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. The 7th string traditionally is a cello string. So that's how I have set this up. And I was using D'Addario chromes flat wound strings. And Patrick pointed out that, and I had known that Gino Sechquadas, the godfather of the modern style, played pyramid strings. And he said pyramids are okay, but Tomastic strings are better. And I was like, oh, please don't tell me that, because Tomastic strings are like $30 a set, and D'Addarios are like, 12 or whatever. But, I've since switched to Tomastic strings, and they're a lot darker sounding. So this is a traditional guitar that is played with a metal thumb pick. Patrick also asked me to acquire all the tools to create my own thumb picks out of this brass sheet metal. But you can acquire, it's a bit of a project in and of itself. Reach out to me if you have questions about that. But acquiring dedeiras, these thumb picks, is tricky, right? So this one here I made, and the grooves and the way you play with a traditional setup, so you can sweep in both directions. Thumb can go down and the fingers can come up. So this guitar is really meant for accompaniment. The metal strings are not conducive to playing solo pieces, playing with a thumb pick and using your fingers. It's awkward because anytime you put the thumb down to rest on the string, it's not very comfortable. But whether you use a dedeira and traditional strings, or you play nylon string, learning to use rest strokes where the thumb is coming coming to rest on the next string, whether you play a sequence of individual lines, individual notes, for example, all on one string, or if you arpeggiate, you're using rest strokes 99% of the time. So if you're not doing that, you're not accustomed to that, please spend some time investing in that, because when I see players trying to use free strokes with a dedera, I mean, it's even more awkward with a dedera, but free strokes, kind of plucking outward and leaving the string, kind of leaving every time you play a note. It's slower and it's much quieter, and these guitars need to be able to project above the percussion and things like that. So that's the dedera. That is the traditional guitar. And baixaria is that language of incorporating counter melodies into your accompaniment. So you want to identify the groove to start with, and all that blah blah blah, those lines, that's baixaria. So to start with your baixaria journey, if you've never done that, you just basically look at the target note that you want. You are clear on what beat you need it for, and you approach that from maybe 1 fret below. So 1, 2, and maybe you could have 2 notes. Ba, ba, bum. If I'm going to that A minor, here's 2 notes approaching the F chord. 2, and you start expanding, right? Then maybe it becomes 3. And before you know it, you're doing more. Along the way becomes the question, you get the question, what notes should I play? Are they all chromatic? Do they use a scale? Do they use an arpeggio? Short answer, yes. So that's its own journey. But just beginning, if you are not a player accustomed to playing baixaria, by approaching chord tones, crucial tones of the chords, right? The tones that make chord up from 1 note below, that is the way that you want to go. And before you get into long lines, you need to be comfortable with approaching different tones of the chord. So a C chord, a basic C chord, has a C, an E, and a G. So being able to approach, for example, the E from a half step below, D sharp into the E. And whatever, and thinking about all the tones of the chord. This is the thing I think that trips people up, because a lot of musicians don't spend the time to know quickly the notes of the chords. And when I was in my 20s, I would walk to my classes at Berklee School of Music, literally just drilling and memorizing notes, asking myself, what are the 4 notes of a G flat major 7, G flat, B flat, D, F? What are the 4 notes of an A minor 7, A, C, E, G? And I would just drill this and drill this. So that mental work is a big part of the choro thing. And then once you have it mentally, you can put it into your playing. Are there players who have it in their playing physically, but don't intellectually know it? Sure. And if you can get there, great, and I think that gets us back to the first thing I mentioned, listening, because here in the US, we can't go to our local cafe every day of the week and hear choro if we wanted to. I mean, frankly, I don't know if it's every single day of the week in Brazil, but you can certainly hear a lot more of it in Brazil. So we have to compensate by our lack of exposure to live music by listening to recorded music all the time. And I think that is how players developed their abilities in Brazil, is the opportunity to play with one another far more than we are able to here. So that often has us isolated, practicing, being frustrated and bored with practicing by ourselves, not seeing the value of being able to know the tones of a chord and approach any given note and practice in real time, mixing the chords up and approaching different tones of different chords. So not for the faint of heart. But again, back to the passion. You have to have the passion for the music to really get somewhere with it. So uh, it looks like for those who just popped in and said hi with waves and stuff like that or whatnot, um, hi back at you. Didn't look like there was any questions. That's cool. If you have any questions, let me know. I scheduled the YouTube live, but then had problems launching it. So apologies for anyone who tried to find what I scheduled for, went to it, and found it not to be happening. I ended up doing a different stream. So anyway, that's all for today. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. If you want that list of songs that I rattle off and details about them to consider, let me know. If you have any questions about the workshop. And if you're coming to California Brazil Camp, I will see you. I think I'm teaching the second week, beginning guitar class and beginning choro class. So that's all for today. Bye, everybody.